A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
We have George Christensen joining us today. George is the Australian Campaigns Director for Citizen Go. It's a global organisation that seeks to defend and promote life, family and liberty. And he's also the recently elected councillor of the Mackay Regional Council. George, welcome to 2020 Today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew.
Firstly, congratulations. You were recently elected as a councillor in the Mackay Regional Council.
Yes, mate, that's quite an honour to be elected as a councillor. It's something that I've revisited. I was there 20 years ago in local government and now back again. So that'll be an experience. It's a humbling experience being elected by your peers. But, I'll be there for the next 4 years serving the people of the Mackay region.
Yeah, excellent. Well, it's a nice little Easter present for you, isn't it?
Well, some people are saying congratulations, other people are saying commiserations, because yesterday you were their friend, today you're their servant.
Yeah, but George, as I introduced earlier, we want to talk about homeschooling because the Queensland state government is looking at ways to get more involved in homeschooling in Queensland. And what's your take on that, George?
Yeah, well, look, there were some rumblings in the media earlier this year that there was going to be changes made with a review of the Education Act to homeschooling in Queensland. And, it seemed that the media had been tipped off by the government and been tipped off, about the state government's unhappiness with homeschooling arrangements at the moment. And, of course, they went to the extreme cases. They talked about, some cults where, and literal cults we're talking about, where children had been homeschooled and, there was poor educational standards amongst those people and some worrying things that were being taught. I mean, well, that's an extreme case, and you never ever rely on extreme cases to make good law. And the actual reality of the situation is homeschooling largely is not broken in Queensland or anywhere else in Australia. In fact, it is punching well above its weight, well above that of the public education system, and I would even argue above that of the Catholic or even private sector, including Christian school land. There are children out there who are homeschooled, and at early teenagers, they're ready for university. I mean, you could not get that, really, through the schooling system, the mainstream schooling system, unless you're talking about some young savants that you have on your hands. So homeschooling really does excel academically. The old criticism is that there's poor socialisation. Well, when I was a member of Parliament, and that's not long ago, only a couple of years back, I used to have a local homeschooling group that would come and visit me every so often, when they were learning about politics or government. And so homeschooling families often get together and their children socialise that way. So there's nothing broken with the system, Andrew. It's just the state government was looking for an excuse to crack down on it. And
yeah,
why?
well, let's just stop there, George. So when you say homeschooling is outperforming the state system and even some of the Catholic and private schools, is that based on data of every student involved in homeschooling? And obviously you've got those extreme cases, again, of super intelligent kids who are ready for university at the age of 13. But is there solid data that backs up the claim that all the kids in the homeschooling program in Queensland are outperforming the other sectors, the state and the private sectors?
Look, I've seen some data that indicates that. I couldn't rattle it off the top of my brain. I'm not a savant myself, don't have that photogenic memory. But look, I can tell you even anecdotally, there was a family in Mackay here that I knew very well. They pulled their kids out of the Catholic education system. And they did so because there was questionable things they were learning about sexuality, even in the Catholic education system. So they homeschooled them. They had, the added benefit of mum being a retired teacher, actually. So for the next few years, the girls in this family were homeschooled. And the family made the decision to put them back into the mainstream schooling system, into the Catholic schooling system for their final year. These children went from being, B minuses, Cs, and even in one case, failing a subject, to being ducks of the school. So that's what homeschooling can do. Now, as I said, I can't rattle off the data for you, but nonetheless, the state government think that that's all bad, that it needs to be more regulated than what it is. And in fact, what they're doing is now trying to impose uniformity and conformity on homeschooling families by saying that every single homeschooler in Australia needs to stick to the national curriculum. Well, that is why most people try and get out of mainstream schooling, because they don't want the national curriculum as the thing guiding the education of their children. And there's a lot of diversity within homeschooling, but you find that by and large, a great deal of homeschoolers are actually Christians, and they have signed up to a Christian-based curriculum. And some of those will, quite frankly, probably struggle to meet the standards, not standards, to meet the guidelines, I've got to say, that the national curriculum imposes, because I think the standards of the national curriculum would be far less than some of the standards that are done in some of the Christian homeschooling curriculums.
Well, certainly morally, George. I mean, you talk about standards. I'm glad you used the word guidelines, because when we talk about standards, the moral standards of some of the government curriculum is abhorrent. I don't know if you saw recently, South Australia was exposed that in a state school there, a teacher was literally teaching about bestiality in the name of relationships and how to have safe relationships with. I mean, it's almost mind-boggling. I don't even want. The Australian Christian Lobby alerted that to us last night on an email. So yeah, the state education curriculum has, in some cases, terrible moral standards.
Yeah, well, that's exactly why a lot of Christian families have decided they're going to do it themselves. And why has there been this reaction? This is a point that I was going to make earlier, but I overlooked. There's been an explosion in homeschooling since the pandemic in Queensland, whereas in Australia, I think homeschooling rates have doubled. In Queensland, they've more than tripled, and that's been in the last 5 years. So that's phenomenal, but it is scared the hell, pardon the pun, out of the Queensland education system because they can't control it. They're not conforming to their standards, and I've got to say their standards, with this example you gave about what happened in South Australia, I did not know about that. That's just gross and disgusting in itself, but the standards are increasingly woke. And I was speaking to, I will say, an unnamed Christian school, because I don't want to get them into trouble, who were looking at the prospect of doing a distance education service that would help homeschooling families, and they've now shied away from it because of these changes. And the reason they've shied away from it is that they just said, look, obviously homeschooling's in the spotlight. We don't want ourselves to come into the spotlight, because if someone come and had a really close look at the curriculum we're providing, we're probably not completely in conformity with the national curriculum, because it's very difficult to run a Christian-based traditional Christian-based education system in conformity with the national curriculum. So there's the problem.
Yeah, and I asked you about raw data before, and sadly for Australia and for our kids, the raw data is our education standards are dropping. We are well down on the list now of the rest of the world as far as our children's ability to read, to write, and to do mathematics. So as you said, in the last... I'm a parent too, George. I'd say in the last 20 years, the school curriculums have been loaded up with woke agenda, things like climate change, gender diversity, all that other stuff, which the government believes is important, but it's come at a cost. And the cost is that a lot of our kids are not reading and writing and doing mathematics as well as kids in Australia were 30 years ago. From Kingaroy has phoned in. Janelle, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me today.
Janelle, what would you like to comment about today?
Firstly, I want to say thank you to George for all his work that he has done in the past and the present with Citizen Go, and just really supporting all those great values, family values, in Australia and now in Queensland, and in his capacity as Citizen Go. I've always been a fan of his. So thank you, George. I also just wanted to comment on some, when you said something about data about homeschoolers. So I've home educated all my children. I have 4 adult children who've left home now, and I was in my submission that I made to the government, I was looking at some information. The Opposition Education Minister actually spoke earlier this year on radio about the plummeting results of literacy and numeracy in Queensland schools, and I looked up some data, and it's around 40% of Queensland school children are less than average in the NAPLAN testing.
Wow. Say that number again. What was that again?
Around 39% was of the school children in Queensland were testing less than average on the NAPLAN tests. And that's very alarming, and I think that if you look at data from New South Wales, I don't think any data has been done in Queensland, but home schoolers that do the NAPLAN testing generally always have a higher than average rating on NAPLAN tests, particularly in grammar. And so what I'm concerned about is that the Queensland Education Department wants to crack down on people who are doing generally a better job than the schools, and that concerns me, that they want us to conform to their way of teaching or their program of teaching, when that really denies the whole adage of everyone's an individual and each child learns at a different pace in a different way. And also, not everyone is going to go to university. Some might do a trade. And in the past, it worked quite well that children would be taught by their, families, and then go into either the family business or whatever it was at a younger age, like you mentioned about being ready for university at 13 or 14. That was normal 100 years ago, So the standards have plummeted, and I don't know why they're worried, educators, in the sense that they're doing well and they're going out in the community and participating well and paying their taxes and getting good jobs. So
absolutely. Well, just hang on there, Janelle, because I want to get George's response to that that number. Almost 40% of Queensland school kids are below the NAPLAN national average. And George, what's your response to Janelle's comments today?
She's spot on. And this is the standard, in inverted commas, that the state government want to lift, apparently, decline really, homeschooling families to. I've just, during the break, tried to grab a little bit of data that I could. There is a home education provider here that I'm looking at the data that they've got up on their website, and these are two just key facts that come out of data. That homeschooled students average between 15 and 30% higher results than public school counterparts. So combined with the high rate of failure to meet NAPLAN requirements, which is basically do you know how to read, write, count properly, do your sums properly, and that number is huge for those that don't know, and yet homeschooling students performing 15 to 30% better on average than public school counterparts. And in fact, another figure, homeschoolers got an average graduation rate of nearly 70% compared to about 60% for children from public schools. So what is the problem that is trying to be solved here? Why is the state government grabbing onto extreme cases, which you never make good laws about extreme cases? I can say that as a lawmaker of nearly 12 years' experience. You never, ever see good laws come out when the government goes to the most extreme cases as the reason to pass those laws. You always know that this is a power grab, that there is something more at play here when they're talking about the extreme cases.
Absolutely. And, they use these extreme cases to quiet everybody up, to shut everybody else's opposition up, don't they? So that if you speak in favour of homeschooling, you're on the side of that cult. Because I read that article too in the Courier Mail, and it's just their way of silencing us. But, George, it raises a bigger issue in Australia, and that is that as someone outside of the political space, my observations is that state and federal and even local governments in Australia are trying to control every area of people's lives. And you're someone who served 4 terms in the federal parliament. You're now in the Mackay Regional Council again. You were there before. What is going on inside the headspace of our modern politicians? Why are they so hell-bent on controlling everyone's lives?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question. It's probably one that we'd need a few hours to discuss, but the short version, I think, particularly as it affects Christian families, there is a modern set of values, and that modern set of values is increasingly becoming very antithetical to the traditional Christian set of values. And so governments, not just governments, but the whole system, we're talking about bureaucracy, whether it's the education, particularly academia, the education apparatus, they want the modern, or postmodern, nearly anti-Christian set of values as to be the ones that are instilled into the next generation. And so this idea that there can be an out for that parents can homeschool it, and parents can instill values in the children that aren't the values that the state prescribes, then brings everything into conflict. And that's why I believe that there is this mood to actually drag parents who homeschool their kids kicking and screaming to actually being forced almost to instill the values that the state wants instilled into these kids.
Yeah.
And I think you can extrapolate that for just about every other area of life.
Absolutely. And like you said, I'd love to talk to you about this for a few hours, and maybe we will one day, George. But we are going to take a break now for the National News Bulletin. Janelle, I want to thank you so much for your call, and I'm sure George appreciates the encouragement as well.
It's great to be on the show, Andrew. And I now that I have the counsellor hat on as well, I need to actually say, because of the rules and regulations, that I'm not speaking on behalf of Mackay Regional Council. Rather, I am speaking on behalf of Citizen Go and talking about this issue. And it's very important to us because it is removing the freedom from mainly faith-based families to actually instill the values in their children that they see fit. And what's happening here is a government takeover, a government imposition of values and almost a swiping away of the family's values. And that should be anathema to every Australian, quite frankly.
Yeah, and it looks to me like they're scared, George, because there's now 40,000 children in Australia enrolled in homeschooling. That's double what it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And Queensland, as you said, has experienced a 195% increase in homeschooling rates. New South Wales saw a 110% increase. South Australia witnessed a 79% increase. So obviously the Queensland state government is getting nervous because they're losing control. Isn't it ironic that in family situations now there's a lot of talk about coercive control, and it is a form of abuse and it's a horrible thing and it's a form of domestic violence, and governments are really cracking down on that. But someone needs to crack down on governments when they start coercively controlling our lives. And this is an example of that, isn't it?
Yes, it's very funny. I've seen the meme that goes around that I'm in an abusive relationship with my government, and it almost seems like that. We get lectured about coercive control, but everything the state seems to be doing these days is coercive control, particularly this. Families should be free to educate their children how they see fit, obviously within reason. I mean, there's got to be academic standards, but once you move past academic standards to other sorts of standards, cultural standards, really, which is what it comes down to. And let me give you an example here, because we throw around the term woke, and people might think, well, what does that mean? What's the actual reality of it? Well, if your listeners want to go to Quadrant Magazine, they've got a great website. It's an online magazine. They published an article last year called A is for Activist, Indoctrination in the Classroom. And this is a very interesting article. It details a lot of the things that are actually being taught as part of the national curriculum, the state-mandated curriculum in all schools. And it's not just public schools. Christian schools, Catholic schools, all private schools have to adhere to the national curriculum. If you are in the, bricks and mortar schooling system, you have to adhere to the national curriculum. And so what we have is a big focus on environmentalism and climate change. And some people might say, well, that's no problem. But the issue is it comes at the expense of something else. So if you're learning about that, and there is a lot of focus on that, and you just need to read this article to see that, an outfit called Cool Australia, which basically sells the climate change message to school children. 1.6 million lessons of theirs were downloaded in 2020. 8,400 of the 9,400 schools were using their teaching templates in 2020. So that is about 89% of Australian schools. And you read the stuff that they talk about, there is a lot of indoctrination. Year 9 and 10 students are encouraged to, not encouraged, they must read the book, This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein, which is an anti-capitalist manifesto. More than that, there is also a big focus on Indigenous history. Now, again, there's nothing wrong per se with having a focus on Indigenous history, but if you're doing it at the expense of civics, if you're doing it at the expense of ancient and modern history, of the Western civilization of which we are now part of, then you've got a very big problem. And it seeps into everything, and it gets political. For instance, English, a couple of the things that many schools are now teaching as part of their English curriculum, they must read, for instance, Paul Keating's Redfern speech.
Oh, you're joking.
Or Kevin Rudd's Sorry speech. Now, and not reading Shakespeare texts. Or,
what about William Shakespeare? That's what I'm thinking. Kevin Rudd, Paul Keating, William Shakespeare. I know who I want my kids reading, that's for sure. This is ridiculous.
Right. And that's why schools are saying to me that they find it very difficult from a traditional perspective to actually run their education as they want it to be run and align with the national curriculum, because some of these things, there is a requirement that a certain amount of time and a certain percentage of the schooling actually be dedicated to those things through the national curriculum. So it becomes very difficult, and I think a lot of homeschooling families are going to find it very difficult. Find it very difficult with reporting, Andrew, because those reporting requirements have gone up through the roof to make it nearly impossible to homeschool. And on top of that, one thing I haven't told you or your listeners yet is there is this very nefarious and ill-defined section in this new bill that they're putting before the Queensland Parliament. And that section talks about the best interests of the child and says that homeschooling must be done safely and with the well-being of the child in question. Now, no one would want it to not be, but the question is, how on earth would homeschooling not be in the best interests of the child?
Exactly.
How on earth would it be harmful to their well-being or harmful to their safety? So these are words which basically a lot of homeschooling families have looked at and gone, that's a red flag. What do they mean? Because there's no definition for that. Who's going to decide what's in the child's well-being? Who's going to decide what's safe and what's not?
Well, we know who's going to decide, and it's the government. But, George, these are really interesting points. But we have a very patient caller from Melbourne, down in Victoria, and his name is Chris. And, Chris, I just want to ask you to make your comment or ask your question to George, please. And thanks for being so patient.
That's no problem. Yeah, I just want to say, the reason that they hate homeschooling is, like you said, they know that the parents don't follow their narrative. Education-wise, in all the ideologies, they're trying to push, climate change, gender, everything else.
Hang on. Sorry, Chris. We've got a really bad line there. I would ask you to call us back, please, because that I couldn't really make out. I think he was just basically reiterating, though, George, what you'd said about how we've loaded up the school curriculum with climate change agenda and all these woke values. And as you said, George, yeah, it's all good and well to say, let's teach this stuff to kids. But like I said, it comes at a cost, doesn't it? Because kids only have so much attention span. There's only so many hours in the day that that they can be reading and studying before they're just done. And if we load them up with all this woke material, they're not going to have the mental energy or the space or the time, are they, to learn traditional subject matter that we want our kids to learn.
That's right. I did hear a bit of what Chris said through the jarble there in the signal, but what he was basically saying is what I was saying before that, everything comes at the expense of something. The state wants to ram down our kids' throats, into their minds, the things that they value, the things that are important to the state, to the current, zeitgeist and culture, and that is climate change, that is Indigenous history, but it's more than that. It's gender fluidity. We know that one is in the classrooms big time at the moment. The whole radical LGBTIQ alphabet super gender, that is being rammed down kids' throats at the moment. So this is what the state wants to impose on all children now. This is what's happening. And I'm glad you said earlier, Andrew, that this is the first cab off the rank. Queensland is the first cab off the rank. If we don't stop this here, then you watch. Other states will follow suit. Queensland, I believe, is the first mover on this issue because of the explosion in homeschooling in Queensland. But if they do it here, they will do it elsewhere.
Yeah, and it'll set a precedent, absolutely.
New South Wales, Victoria, wherever.
Absolutely. And you can hear the announcement, well, Queensland's already done this and it's working up there, so we better do it as well. But it looks like Chris has called us back. And Chris, I'm so glad you did. Are you there, Chris?
Yes, I was agreeing with George in that. And like I said, they know that the parents don't follow their narrative in all these things and won't accept it. So what they are scared of is that the children will be, according to their words, be taught misinformation, see? And this is what they can't stand, that more and more people will be aware of their schemes. And so they want to make you more and more compliant in so many things. And finally, the compliancy will end with the mark of the beast. So,
yeah, it is all about compliance and it's all about conformity. You're 100%. George, you got a response for Chris today?
Yeah, look, is right. It is about compliance and conformity. What they don't want is critical thinkers, particularly when that critical thinking is going to be against state-imposed things, state-imposed controls. They don't want anyone speaking against, the current thing. I think that is what homeschooling does with children. They are exposed to a lot of parents, right, are actually going down the classical education road when it comes to homeschooling. And this is the old, you're learning your grammar, as in, your basics. Then you're learning logic, how to, make sense of things. And then you're learning rhetorical rhetoric, where you're learning how to explain these things. And kids that are learning basics, they're understanding how things work, and then they'll be able to explain how things work. This is very dangerous to government. It's very dangerous, I'm going to say, to the elites that are in control of the current culture, because once you get people that can use logic and explain things well, it poses a threat to their agenda. It really does. And I think that deep down, some of them recognise this. They don't want that form of education anymore because it leads to critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And critical thinking is really what made the West great, isn't it? That people were allowed to think, to dream, to imagine, to create, and industries were born out of that, ideas. Guys like Henry Ford, who weren't born into, nobility, came up with an idea and a concept of making cars for the average man and great, the world was a better place, wasn't it, when people like Henry Ford were free to do what they wanted to do without the government stopping them and intruding upon what they wanted to do and over-regulating everything so much that it was too hard to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And, we some areas of life that we never thought that they would come for, and I think education is one of them, but the reality is, and I don't want to overplay this or overstate it, but let's go back to the granddaddy of socialism, of Marxism. The name says it all. Karl Marx himself. And I mean, if you read some of the work by Marx and Engels, the founders of that political ideology, they clearly talk about getting control of public education, of instilling different values in children to that of their families so that they can create a new order. And so, again, I don't want to make too much of it, but there it is in black and white in some of the key books of communism. So
absolutely. Well,
why we are where we are.
Absolutely. It's it's not the first rodeo, is it? But I just want to thank you so much, Chris, for being patient and calling in and making your comments. We've got a couple more callers who've called in as well, but thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you.
God bless. Okay, we have Katerina who's calling in from Adelaide in South Australia. Are you there, Katerina?
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you? What would you like to comment on today?
Good. Well, look, you're talking about indoctrination of our children, and as I was just saying to Leah, like I'm sure that you've heard of it by now, this Renmark High School that has had a presentation about not only about people who've undergone gender transitioning, but they also discussed bestiality with the Year 9 students.
Yeah, that was bestiality, wasn't it? That was discussed in a school classroom recently.
That's right. And you're kind of like, you know, the school might say, oh, well, we didn't know. No, the school has to know everything that goes on that is taught to your children. They're guardians of your children while they got them in their care. And you're kind of like, no, how is that not that a school can't know that something like that is going on under their own roof? They would have had to know. They would have had to know who these people are, who they represent. But, you know, you kind of, well, this is putting things in kids' heads, which is indoctrination, and things that they probably never would have thought about before this.
Yeah, I believe that presentation was made by an organisation called Headspace, and it all sounds really good. Like it's all about mental health for kids and about creating safe environments for kids. And I think maybe sometimes these groups come into schools under the radar, and the school just assumes that they're going to be actually helping the mental health and the safety of the kids. And that's, I think, what happened in that particular presentation, that they slipped it in there as part of a presentation to help kids be safe in relationships and in sexual choices.
But the school should be actually checking what people who are coming into the school, they should be checking what they're going to be teaching. You know, that's part of their job is, you know, that bad enough that they're going to be indoctrinating your kids, but if they're going to let third parties into the school, they also got to know what they're teaching, and maybe they do, and maybe they're just trying to get out of being trouble by saying, oh, no, we didn't know it's a third party. But I'm sure that, like I said to Leah, I'm sure if I went there and said I wanted to come in and do a talk about Jesus, I'm sure I'd be like, no, thanks, we don't need that, you know.
Biblical sexuality, that'd go down well, wouldn't it? I want to tell you what the Bible says about sex, Hey, I really want to thank you, Katerina, from calling in from Adelaide, South Australia. We've got a couple more calls in the queue, but we really appreciate your comments today on 2020.
Thank you.
And we have some more callers calling in here. The lines are hotting up today. Now, we have Beck from the Sunshine Coast. Let's try and get Beck. Beck, have you got a comment or a question for George today?
Yeah, well, I just met with the local MP. I'm in Queensland fighting this legislation, and he basically just said we can't do anything. It's a Labor bill. It's a Labor government. Like, I've made my submission. There's 900 online. We're meeting with the MPs. We're sending emails to Di Farmer.
Who's your MP?
Tony Perrott, Gympie.
Yeah, I know Tony. He's a good guy. He's right. Unfortunately, they're in control. But what you could ask Tony is, well, there's a good chance you guys are going to get into office later in this year after October. If they pass this, will you repeal it? That's what I'd be asking Tony Perrott. So maybe you want to give him a call back and just ask him, will the state opposition, if they win government this year, repeal these changes so that schooling families have the freedom to teach what they want to teach rather than the national curriculum?
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So can I ask you too, Beck, how did you find out about this proposed, intrusion into homeschooling, and what skin have you got in the game? Have you got kids being homeschooled now?
Yeah. I homeschool my girls, and I'm just on the homeschool Facebook page. There's plenty of groups, but there's one group where there's two amazing homeschooling mums, Amanda Bartle, I can't remember the other one, sorry, and they are organising us all. They're telling us, right, email these people, this is the email, write your submissions here. They went to the court hearings 2 weeks ago and yesterday, so they're keeping thousands of people involved and getting into it. But unfortunately, like I said, the MP today was basically like, well, sorry, I can't really, my hands are tied, you know. So we're doing what we can, but it does feel like without having a Senate in our government that we're a little bit at the hands of the government.
Yeah.
Well, I think George's suggestion was a good one, and that is talk about the future to your local MP, who's obviously in the opposition at the moment. But I want to drill down a little bit further into your story, Beck. Why did you decide to homeschool your kids?
Well, plenty of reasons, really. One was I wasn't happy with what I was seeing in schools. I wasn't happy with the behaviour that was going on by other students that my kids would be exposed to, but also I don't know that teacher. I don't know what their values are, and they're going to spend more time with my kid than I am and speak into their life. I'm not okay with that. And also the curriculum, we're doing far more than what the ACARA curriculum is doing. So I can give my child a better, more grounded education. Like, we're doing history, we're doing geography, we're doing foreign language. All that is not in the curriculum for her age group. That's not until later. So we're giving her more of an education at the moment, and these legislation will actually limit what we're doing, not benefit.
Yeah, wonderful. How old's your daughter?
7.
Yeah, I mean, it's a magical time, isn't it, when your kids are that age? And I just think to have you there as mum teaching and just being with her in those magical years, I mean, there's nothing better than that. And I actually find it offensive that the government is trying to intrude on this and stop people like you from just having that time with your daughter, who you brought into the world. The government didn't bring her into the world, and you want to share that time with her and educate her. And I really hope that this opposition gets up and this petition. And George, this is probably a good segue for you to tell us about the petition and tell us what we can do as Queenslanders to push back against this.
Well, the organisation that the caller was just speaking about with Amanda Bartle, who I've spoken to, is Free to Homeschool. So if people want to go to freetohomeschool.org with the number 2 rather than the TO, they can find a parliamentary petition on there. That parliamentary petition is being put forward by a North Queensland MP I know quite well, Nick Demetto, who's with the Canada's Australia Party, and they've got about 14,000 signatures to that at the moment, so they need more signatures. And Citizen Go is also running a petition against it. If people go to citizengo.org, they will find a heading just down the page called Hands Off Homeschooling. We've got about 18,500 signatures that have gone direct to the Education Minister. We're going to launch a new petition where we're going to target those marginal Queensland Labor MPs, because they will be very nervous right now, given that there's a lot of thought and commentary that they're on their way out, and a lot of those marginal Labor MPs might not have a job after October, and what they don't need is a bunch of homeschooling parents breathing down their necks as well. So we're going to target them quite deliberately in the hopes that they will raise concerns with the Premier, with the Education Minister, and say, hey, we don't need another issue that's going to cost us our jobs. And that's the way we're going to do it. We're going to talk to these MPs. We're going to tell them that if they vote for this, if they don't speak out against it, they're not going to get our vote. And that's the way we deal with it. That's democracy.
Well, that's a good strategy. I like that. So just repeat the website that people can go to get involved in this.
Parliamentary petition is free to the number 2 homeschool.org, or the other petition, which is going straight to the Education Minister, is citizengo.org, and we'll be launching a new petition next week where we're targeting those marginal Labor MPs and getting them to buck their government's laws.
Yep, so citizengo.org and freetohomeschool.org as well. And Beck, I just want to thank you, Beck from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, for calling in. She's off the line now. We do have another caller who wanted to get through, but we couldn't take her call. Really sorry about that. That was Sue in Tasmania. But George Christensen, I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your insights on this topic today, and also for rallying people to push back against what the Queensland government is trying to do. And just to remind everybody, George is the Australian Campaigns Director for Citizen Go. They're a global organisation that seeks to defend and promote life, family and liberty. 3 things that as Christians we all love. And he's also the recently elected Councillor of the Mackay Regional Council. George Christensen, I want to thank you so much for joining us again on 2020 Today.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.